And welcome back to Hour 3. We have Tim Alexander here. He's here at least twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday. Tim, you're following at your blog, europebusiness.blogspot.com. Lots of stories. As I say, it's not just fish on the docks that are smelling in Denmark. The Germanwings flight, Mike Rivero, who also is here on the Genesis Network, and others have actually made statements that there's too many anomalies here and the information's coming out too fast and furious. The excuse.
It's a red flag in and of itself.
Right.
Very quickly, he's depressed. Very quickly, it's the co-pilot, and he's depressed, and he's a Muslim. He converted to be a Muslim, and he's gay, and his eyesight's going, ba, 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 ba. And then they found his DNA, but then they had to backtrack. The German government said, well, no, we found lots of DNA, but we haven't identified any individuals yet. And then, of course, the audio recording, which nobody has listened to, but they tell us, the pilot is outside the door banging, trying to get in the door, and the people are screaming on the plane. Here's the problem with that, and it's not the only problem with this. There are two black boxes. One was supposedly totally destroyed. The other is intact, except the memory chip card is missing. And Mike Rivero clearly showed in a picture on his site and others that it's not built that way. It's not a single memory chip card. It's hardwired data. It's not a card that can pop out. It's not built like that at all. And by the way, since they don't have all the other data, where the hell did they get this recording from? Because it's all stored in the black box, you see. And of course, why couldn't the pilot just punch in the code and get in? There are many things that stink about this. Now, last week when I took over a couple of segments on Wednesday, Harvey Schlanger was on, and one thing he was telling me is they were getting a lot of feedback pretty quickly from Europe on the talk sites that people were saying this is the usual suspects, that this was a warning to the president of France and the chancellor of Germany to get back on the globalist train. And I guess the Zionist train as well. And it was very telling that both the Chancellor of Germany and the President of France were at, shortly after the accident, helicoptered into the crash scene. Now, Germany and France both pushed very, very hard for the not a peace agreement, but the ceasefire in the Ukraine. And both have signed on to this Chinese development fund in Asia. And the real battle, ultimately it's a spiritual battle, but the real battle that's taking place in the world today is between the globalists and Netanyahu Zionists on one hand, and the rest of the world that's still free of their control on the other hand. And even in countries that are under their control, you have very powerful forces. I mean, that's what's been happening in Germany. They've been Merkel's been flip-flopping back and forth because she's under intense pressure. There are a lot of small and medium-sized German firms that are high-tech, and a big part of their product goes to Russia. And just in the last month, you've seen about a 36% drop in exports from Germany to Russia. And this is really hitting them. But also, there's this enormous fear in Germany. They were destroyed twice. First World War, Second World War. They don't want to go there. They know that Third World War, nobody's going to survive. And save for the return of Christ himself, nobody's going to survive. It's a human life extinction event. But the globalists, the bankers, have so loaded the entire world with debt. The only way that they can get out of debt is basically to wipe it out, and they'll never agree to that. And to basic reforms. So they want a world war.
Yeah, it's like the game where, let's put it this way. I remember being in grade 8 and 9, and we played a game called King of the Hill. And it was back in Nova Scotia, Canada, where you'd have snow piled up, and you get on the top of the snow pile, and you get, 40, 50, 60 kids. And they try to see who's going to stay on the top of the pile. And, of course, it got pretty unpleasant about how people push off. But if one kid had, let's say, in his hand a little red device with a button on it and said, well, you make me king of the hill or I'm going to blow up the hill. And everybody doesn't believe him, but he realizes, well, see that hill over there? I'm going to push a button and that mound of snow blows up. All the kids are going to jump off the mound. What we have right now is a bunch of bankers basically are saying, I want to control the world even though I've put so much debt that we can't maintain the current financial system, but I will control it or I'll blow it up. And that's actually what they're doing.
And with them, you have Netanyahu with their sanction option with hidden nukes in capitals all over the world. And they're basically saying the same thing. If we don't get what we want, which is basically we want to control everything, and we're hand in hand with the globalists, if we don't control, and Netanyahu is essentially working for him, we're going to blow up the world too.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a Luciferian scenario that is staring the world, staring us down in the world. But so what are we supposed to do? Say, okay, yes, we will be your slave. Yes, Mr. Netanyahu.
Well, it's not going to happen. Right?
Yes, Mr. Rothschild.
By the way, the Bible is written in such a way that it's not deterministic that we have to have the destruction of everything. It says in the book of Mark that unless those days were not shortened, no flesh would survive. What God is saying is, I'm going to shorten the days, meaning the days of destruction. I'm going to shorten the physical days, so there's going to be more darkness in the sky by the debris that's coming in. And I'm going to shorten those days so that the globalists won't be able to accomplish what they want. We have overachievers like Obama, who's not incompetent. He's very competent at destroying America and the Constitution. He wants to sign the Small Arms Treaty we talked about in the last hour with Michael Connolly from the U.S. Justice Foundation. We talked to Lowell Ponte about how the German Chancellor was actually raised in East Germany and has a statuette of Catherine the Great, who was a German who joined into married the Tsar, and the Tsar, of course, was taken out because he was insane. And she ran Germany as a Tsarina for many years and actually was involved with the invasion that took over many years ago, the area of the Crimea, which is part of Russia. The fact is that we don't show we have to move from a point of strength, but we don't have to go to war with Russia. We should be allies with them to get rid of extreme Islam. And when I saw the report by Bashar al-Assad on 60 Minutes the other night, the interviewer, by the way, looked like an idiot. And Bashar al-Assad came back with concrete and reasonable and humanistic answers that basically says he is supported by his people because he knows that Wahhabism is dangerous. He knows Wahhabism is a disease there.
Priest that I had on your show maybe a year or so ago that actually sat down right across from him and had dinner with him. And he said he thought the man was very rational. He wanted peace. And, when you actually talk to people that have dealt with these people, you get some very different perspectives. Now, here's a good perspective on Netanyahu.
Right.
The Defense Intelligence Agency picked up, evidently recorded this without his knowledge in a place called Bing Spar. And I quote, this is Netanyahu speaking, and this was from 1990. If we get caught, they will just replace us with persons of the same cloth. So it does not matter what you do. America is a golden calf, and we will suck it dry, chop it up, and sell it off piece by piece until there is nothing left but the world's biggest welfare state that we will create and control.
Well, you can see that happening with Detroit, where you have a massive migration of
one more thing. Why? Because it's the will of God, and America is big enough to take the hit, so we can do it again and again and again. This is what we do to countries that we hate. We destroy them very, very slowly and make them suffer for refusing to be our slaves, end quote. Now, that is Benjamin Netanyahu, our great ally.
Yeah, well, he's not an ally. He's actually trying to be our conqueror. Remember now that ultimately, these are Sabbatean Satanistic wizards. They're not ancient Hebrews. People need to grasp that.
That's right.
If we want it to be turned into a Christian nation, we need to annex it, make it a nation where we return America to be a Christian republic, period. Not a secular agnostic, communist, and total totalitarian control serfdom of globalist satanic maniacs. And, Tim, there's a couple of issues. The issue about Yemen is very big. Yemen is being bombed very badly. They say, quote, the group is collapsing, which I don't think, you can't really get rid of these people unless you annihilate them all. The Saudi Arabians have put in a blockade of the Red Sea down near the Gulf of Aden.
Along with the Egyptian Navy.
Right, and what's going on is they're lining up basically the two sides in terms of the battle lines drawn for this great war. It's a Sunni Shiite war. It's a war where ultimately there'll be missiles flying. Both Saudi Arabia has the Chinese-based Silkworm-type missiles, which have been upgraded several years ago. I have actual contacts who have given me the missile satellite photos, etc. So this is not a conspiracy theory. The Iranians have the Shahib 3 missile, which
they also have Scud missiles that can hit a large part of Saudi Arabia.
Right, but the missiles, yeah, but and the Iranians have the Shahib missile, which was an upgrade from the Russian liquid fuel rocket, which they over a decade ago upgraded to the solid fuel rocket system and increased the range now, so it goes over 2,000 kilometers. So we got a big problem on our hands, and the Iranians basically are our allies in getting rid of ISIS right now in Mosul and northern Iraq. What's going to happen?
I wouldn't call the Iranians our allies.
Well, they're the allies because they're calling in drones, calling in airstrikes, and the American-based airstrikes are actually helping the Iranian Quds force clear out the area. So the civilian militia, which is the old Shiite militias across Iraq, as well as the Quds force from Iran, are the only force that are actually stopping ISIS spreading, other than the Peshmerga forces, which are the Kurdish forces, which are very powerful, taking some of the towns in northern Syria. So what I see happening is the war now is lining up for a great conflict, and we're getting close to major disaster.
You're right, Dr. Bill, but here's a key thing, and I don't think most of the alternative media is really picking up on this, because I was involved with aerospace firms, and I think strategically, or at least try to. This is a case of the Iranian side taking the strategic initiative. Iran, Syria, the Russian and Chinese and other allies have been responding in the Ukraine, responding in the Middle East, responding in Syria and Iraq and so forth. But the overthrow of the U.S. and Saudi-backed very corrupt regime in Yemen, and most of these Arab regimes are corrupt ones, regardless of whether they're Sunni or Shantai or whatever, But here's the point. This is a strategic initiative. Now, Iran is kind of driving this issue. Whether or not they will be successful in Yemen is another thing. But they've crossed the Rubicon here now. They are now taking the strategic initiative, and that is a very major thing in terms of warfare. And it will be difficult. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is insisting they're not going to put troops in, which means they probably will. The Egyptians may go in as well. The Saudi Air Force has been, and Saudi Arabia has one heck of an Air Force.
But you can never win a war by air command. They have to put people on the ground. And to be honest with you, most of Yemen is extremely vicious mountainous communities, so it's impossible. Just like half of Syria is very vicious mountainous areas, it's impossible to defeat the Yemenis.
They spread their heavy stuff out. They have they still have an intact air defense system with good missiles. They have their Scuds and so forth. So. Well, by the way, Israel has joined with the Royal Saudi Air Force in attacking with their aircraft, and the veil of this, behind the veil, the Saudis and the Israelis were always in bed with one another, but on the other side of the veil, all the Saudis hated them, and vice versa. That veil has kind of been lifted now. And this is all approaching a general Middle Eastern war, which is something that Netanyahu has wanted for a very long time, and the globalists want to expand.
Well, it's an open window. I think that now that Netanyahu has a margin of victory, which he did probably by corruption and threats. And we have a childlike Israeli voting population that, with their own common sense, knows what Netanyahu is doing is dangerous and could put their lives in danger, but nevertheless they voted for this fool. What's going to happen is that it's extremely likely that in the next 6 months, Iran's going to see this as a green light, especially with the moves by Obama to go around Israel and make a deal with Iran, which they're pushing like crazy. The only thing that's saving the fact that there's no deal is the fact the Iranians won't turn over higher grade uranium, which is beyond the range of enrichment that's necessary for fuel rod assemblies, which means they were and are still lying to us that they want to have nuclear weapons. So the fact is, Netanyahu has an open window now to start attacking the reactor sites before they, under this, quote, treaty, move them to places where it's too deep or in places where they're protected, where they can't get at them.
They probably already have them. I mean, I've never been a firm believer that Iran is telling the truth about what they're doing.
Well, of course they never have, but my guess is
in the Middle East. But look, Iran has probably the biggest advanced biological warfare program on Earth, and that is the equal of a moderately good thermonuclear warfare program in and of itself.
They continue the biopreparat program. They moved the biopreparat program from north of Moscow to Tehran.
Exactly, about 22 or so years ago. And so that makes Iran a very dangerous adversary, both for Israel and Saudi Arabia, but for the United States, because you don't need an ICBM to...
Well, yeah, exactly. In fact, here's the story. Get this little metaphor in your mind, people. We have, let's say, in 6 cities across the United States, Iranian... Quds Force biological terrorists ready with a lyophilized, they're biological scientists with a PhD. They probably have university affiliation or working on further PhD research at a major U.S. university in the back of a refrigerator, either in their university lab or in their home.
Working at Mickey D's, or freezer's full of the stuff.
Right, so he just has to go to the back with a lyophilized super weapon, and activate it, and put it into a spray bottle, and get a bus ride and drive around the city and just sit the thing out the window and just start spraying. That's all you have to do.
You can have something that looks like a cell phone, and it's actually, you're atomizing, you got a little pump, and you're atomizing a little bit of water, a sterile saline solution with viral material. And you can do that in a church, in a movie theater, in a shopping center, a shopping mall, anywhere where there's a bunch of people. And then, 2 weeks later, people start coming down with some really weird diseases, and all of a sudden the ERs are full, and all of a sudden you've got the biggest nightmare that America has ever faced in its entire history. And that's the danger when you start pushing a country like Iran, which is not a small country, which has not been defeated. You push them in the corner, and they're going to fight back, and they're not going to... They're going to come across the ocean. You see, that ocean's not a bar. They're already here. And
well, that's why we talked about that with Michael Connolly. We have a number of these terrorists that Obama and the government knows already are in America in cells right now.
Yep.
As the New World Order continues to tighten its grip on every facet of our lives.
Tim, what I think people should do, and I talked about this for an hour or two with Dave Mitchell, I think people need to prepare spiritually for what's going on, also physically. They need to be ready for the fact we have crazies in control. Obama is basically out of his mind. He's not just incompetent, he's evil. He's actually very, very highly performing exactly what he has as a minion of Satan. He's performing as a minion of the globalist bankers, who literally their final common card is, what I call the deck of Armageddon cards, is to say, hey, you won't let me be in control, I'll blow it all up. And believe it or not, they're actually ready to do it. We see the Middle East blowing up, and America's on both sides of ISIS. We have ISIS, by the way, is going to be in getting more and more out of control. We have a situation now where the world economy is ready to crash and burn, and it's probably going to be at least a 20% correction this year. I mean, we already see it in motion to crash.
I think that's very conservative.
Conservative, yeah, but I mean conservative, so it's going to be pretty well guaranteed to fulfill. I don't see a total collapse, and the reason why I'll tell you this is we're going to move from that potential total collapse to a period of false security, false prosperity, where actually things will come back better than ever, and false peace, which is exactly what it says in the book of Hosea, one of the last prophets before the New Testament, and in the book of Acts, when they shall say peace and security, then destruction shall come upon them suddenly. So we're going to be willing to compromise. We have a compromising Haman president in Obama, who's willing to partition the state of Israel to give a state to Palestinians. Now, I believe Palestinians should be treated with respect, but the best thing for them is to move them to where they should be, which was decided to have a two-state solution to Jordan, which is a state where they belong. Or like take the Egyptian solution, which is 5 times larger than the Palestinian territories, and move them to a part of the Sinai. Instead of doing that,
they don't want a solution. You know, I came up with a proposal which I called the Sterling Proposal for Peace in the Middle East many years ago. And I sent it to all the Arab leaders and to the then Prime Minister of Israel, Sharon. And Sharon's National Security Advisor on Sharon's letterhead sent me a letter saying they were seriously considering it. Well, they did. They took my idea. This was at a time when buses were being blown up in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and so forth by terrorists. I said, immediately you've got to build a wall that's very tall, very solid, and nothing with 2 legs or 4 legs can cross without permission and live. But you've got to solve the problem. You've got all these people that have been living in tent cities and have been dispossessed from 48 on. Look, what are their olive grove, their house, their farm was worth? Whenever they lost it, triple it, pay them compound interest, treat them well, but don't just give them cash, because unless you're prepared to handle a bunch of cash, most people end up losing it. You give them some cash, but you mostly give them stock in Israeli high-tech firms. You spread it out over a lot of firms. It pumps money in the Israeli economy, and you make darn sure that there's no funny business, that these Arabs get a quarterly dividend. When Israel does good, they do good. You solve the peace problem, but
it's not just a financial.
They took the wall, and within 3 months they start. Yeah,
but they'll take the negative side, Tim, of what you did. See, that's the Tim Alexander solution. Here's the definition. I'm going to just repeat this for people to understand. There's only one type of sin. A lot of people think there's all kinds of sin. As even King David says, he did not sin against his fellow Israelis, or he sinned against the Most High God. You can't sin against man. You can do evil against man, but you can only sin against God. Because God's the only one with an infinite covenant that's the righteous one. So you can't sin against somebody who's unrighteous. People don't understand that. And sin is basically, here's a definition. If you hear and do God's will, you're not sinning. And if you're doing anything other than hearing and doing, which is the word Shema, related to the Shin, which is the same as the Aaronic priesthood, like Spock, who recently died, would basically say, in a sense, a variation of the Aaronic blessing when he talked about his so-called Viking heritage. Viking, I mean, his, what do you call it, Klingon.
Not Klingon. What was it? Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. It's, in other words, his heritage, basically, for these Star Trek series.
Yeah.
The real issue is this. If you're not going to solve the problem by just giving finances to Arabs. They believe in a faith system that has both words that were given by Muhammad that are godly, whether they're from his own mind or from the Most High God. But he also, as he said in the Satanic Letters, were exposed by Solomon Rushdie, that every imam in the world knows, both Sunni and Shiite, that Muhammad basically speed-dialed to Satan, and he actually said that to his wife even in the actual Quranic letters, okay? And they were written down, by the way. People don't know this history. The Quran was written down by the Caliph of Baghdad, who had a Jewish scribe who was if you want to call it a very educated man, who was actually kept into a pit for 18 years. And at the end of writing the Quran down in his version, because there were 5 different versions of the Quran floating around, he wanted his version to become the prescient one, he executed him. So most people don't realize the script that is the Islamic script that came out of the Quran was invented by a Jew, a scholar.
No, you're right. I didn't know that. That's a good one.
Right. Now, the fact is, you have to understand this, that anybody who's a scholar, including Salman Rushdie, who wrote this from London, who's an Islamic scholar, and he was a Muslim, by the way, he made it very plain. He understood that if you want to call it, he was channeling Satan. Now, the problem is you can't deal with the people who have satanic ideas, and that includes whether it's a quote, a Catholic, occultic faith, like, for example, the Knights Templar that did evil things during the Middle Ages, or specific cultic groups like the Shinrikyo cult from Japan, where the current prime minister belongs to this death cult. If you're dealing with people who believe in satanic ideas, or they're literalists like the imams of Iran, that believe that the Imam Mahdi can only happen if they have a great war in the Middle East, which is happening right now. The Mahdi is going to come and actually take over the world. You've got a problem. You've got literalists that have satanic and viewpoints and satanic eschatology. you got a real big problem.
Well, yeah, and,
this is not,
and the Jews think that this will bring their Messiah, but their Messiah has already come, and the Muslims are thinking, their guy's coming, and et cetera, and it's all nutty.
Right. Well, here's the point. I'm a mortar man building the New Jerusalem. I'm a guy that's there with my bowl mixing the mortar of what I call the living stones. That's you and me. We are the stones of the New Jerusalem. It's not a building out there. It's us. And as I've said before, we are the bride. As Jesus said himself, we're the bride of God, which means we also have a scepter and we have a right to rule, and we have, if we're here in God's will, to call down his authority to take control of this world. When we're doing this show, we're taking control over the world by spreading his word. It's raining down from heaven, just like the prophecies of Daniel. Many will run to and fro, and the word of the Most High God will flow on the earth just like the rains. In other words, will fall down from the sky. What's happening is that even among Islamic circles, they're starting to come to the realization here in America, even though there's lots of imams spreading lies and hatred, most Muslims are starting to realize, like, hey, there's some beautiful, if you want to call prose in the Quran, but there's also some pretty evil things that violate normal, decent humanity. And when I see the extremist, we call feminist groups in America, they support Islamic groups that put down and destroy and execute women, even with what we call honor killings. Now, that's not rational. So they don't understand, you can't have a cognitive dissonance and get away with it. You can't say someone's a fetus, and therefore you can get rid of them, when the word fetus just means a little human being. You can't go and destroy the rights of women and say that you're pro-feminist when these are feminine women in these other countries that are being put down and destroyed by Islam, because Islam is basically a satanic faith. The same way as the craziness of the Sabbatean Satanistic Jews, who consider all of us, the rest of the people in the world, as soulless dogs to be manipulated like the golem of America just for the bidding of the Jews. And of course, a lot of the Christians that bind to the idea that we're going to be raptured and the world is going to be left in the hands of the Jews.
100-year-old theory and 2,000 years of Christianity.
Yeah, these people need to shut the heck up, okay? And if you disagree with me, I'm going to rip you apart on the air, because you need to understand this. This is not a minor thing or just an opinion. What you're doing is spreading a heresy that will destroy people, because they won't be preparing for financial collapse, geopolitical disaster, ecological collapse, and war. They're not prepared for the tribulation, but we, the Philadelphians, will be prepared spiritually and physically, and we have our sword at our side, and we're ready to pray for our enemies, but we're ready for battle.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space.
And welcome back. And by the way, all hours are open for people, open lines. If you disagree with us, please, but no ad hominem attacks, but raise issues, raise objections. What we tell people is we don't have all the answers, but we have really good questions. Because we have a lot of the answers, you need to pay attention to it. And this isn't conspiracy theory. Most of the information we're basing our statements on are based on open media. So this isn't really open to kind of a lot of discussion. It's just one of those is things. If you actually become informed, you say, oh my gosh. Yes, they are using American drone information, the Saudi Arabians, to be able to target Yemeni towns and cities. Do they not think this is eventually going to lead to an expanded Middle Eastern Sunni Shiite war? Do they not think if the Middle East blows up, the Strait of Hormuz will close? And by the way, I want to say this. The very first vision I had after I got clay and iron back in 1992 was, by the way, this is just after going to Israel with a pastor from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and meeting Nicolas Saliba, that I was shown, and actually a vision of him and his name before I even arrived there, which came to the old city and had, was a stonemason for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, as well as a Russian Orthodox church. And people need to understand what's really going on here is we are on the edge of a major, major conflict. Obama's trying to split the city of Jerusalem and the state into a two-state policy. They're with the United Nations against Netanyahu. Netanyahu is almost certainly, in the next 3 to 6 months, going to attack Iran. I think it's virtual certainty. I don't see this stopping at all. And in fact, the very fact that they're still not getting a deal, and the Iranians are refusing to pass over enriched uranium, pretty well guarantees that Netanyahu is going to pull the trigger.
Well, when and if that or some other event triggers a third world war. We were talking about this on the break. Russia has built just in the last year about 5,000 new nuclear shelters in Moscow alone. And I'm not talking about their big underground facilities here and there. And by the way, I've been on subway systems in a number of cities and countries. The one in Moscow is quite interesting. They're very proud of how fancy some of their stations are. I'm not that impressed.
Underground artwork and so on, but they're extremely deep, aren't they?
I'm not that impressed. I was more impressed with Montreal's. But anyway, you go down an escalator. It's the deepest I've ever been on an escalator. And the reason why is decades ago it was built as a nuclear shelter for a large part of the population of Moscow. I mean, it is really deep. It's many times deeper than what you'll find in New York or
anywhere,
wherever.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they are preparing. Now, I'd like our listeners in the United States, in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and most of Europe. Some kind of countries in Europe are well prepared, like the Swiss. But by the way, do you know where your closest nuclear fallout shelter is?
No, not.
And in your town, if you're shopping, if you're working in your office, where's your fallout shelter? In the 70s, I remember there were stories. Well, we used to have these signs up, fallout shelter below. And people looked at them and they said, well, there's some old biscuits here, civil defense biscuits and water that's 20 or 30 years old.
People think it's one of the problems with doing what we do every day is it's so fantastic and it's so horrifying that people put it out of their mind that it can't possibly ever happen. This is, of course, the circumstances mentally that occurred before the war was declared for World War I and II. Even people in Germany had no idea that a world war was going to come. They had no idea. And we had a highly...
they thought it was going to be over in a few months.
Right. Now, the problem is, and I'm going to read off a little bit, last Friday, of course, Alex had a big show talking about underground nuclear and underground shelters. I've been talking about this for years because, I had U.S. Q-level security clearance, and I was one of the doctors taking care of employees at U.S. Space Command, Strategic Defense, and Star Wars, and I've been in the most secure underground facility on the planet at Schriever Air Force Base. I've been down there a couple miles underground. And what people need to understand is this is not imaginary. They spent trillions, not billions, trillions of dollars on these, and they were building a new one in the mid-'90s every 7 weeks. Now, every country on Earth has these shelters pretty well. China, Russia, and even North Korea.
Can you get into one? Can your neighbors get into one? Can I? How about my neighbors?
The largest one nearby here, by the way, is Pendleton Marine Corps Base. They have a giant facility underneath there. Which, by the way,
go up to the gate and see what happens to you.
I don't think you're likely to get in unless you're doing some work.
They tried to crash NSA.
Unless you have some.
You look like Swiss cheese.
Unless you're doing some special work for them and they give you security clearance to get in. Here's the issue. The globalists, and I'm going to read this out, they said they repeatedly reported to you a renegade CIA operative, Susan Arrigo, MD, told a journalist friend years ago that ruling elite intend to trigger nuclear war just prior to descending into their elaborate underground cities. She said that they do have the technology to nuclearize radioactive contamination. By the way, I did get some links sent to me on that, and I'm quite familiar with some of these scientists that are actually using called subatomic particle physics to get rid of and shatter, just like cutting a diamond to shatter and change the T1 half or the half-life of radioisotopes. These technologies exist.
I figured there was a process, but go ahead.
Yeah, I got a number of links for processes. They're all in actual U.S. patent offices, too, by the way. These are not kind of airy-fairy ideas out there. They're actual, nuclear physicists and quantum physicists that actually have patents on it. So what people need to understand that this is not imaginary. But here's the fact. Our God is God. And he's not nervous and he's on the throne. What's going to happen is we're moving to a time where man's going to have to decision. Are you going to listen and do God's will and have civilization survive, or are you going to do your own will? For example, even your plan for Israel. That plan, if it doesn't come directly from God, is by its definition evil, because the Israelis took the bad part of that plan and put the wall up, but they never fixed the issue. The real issue is, like Jesus said, I was watching the program there by Fox News guy O'Reilly, and by the way, he's got a very disturbed view of Jesus. His idea was Jesus was confused. He didn't really know he was God when he was actually first getting his ministry, which I thought was kind of bizarre. Sorry, Mr. O'Reilly. Jesus knew he was God in the utero, okay? So just...
there's something called the Nicene Creed that just about all true Christians accept.
Right.
And it's covered in that. But if you don't know that, I don't think you're Christian.
Exactly. But that wasn't in the movie. And by the way, it was done by this agnostic that did a movie on Moses, which is another abomination. So there's some major theological errors in this movie that was put up by killing Jesus. But what people need to understand is that God is going to intervene, and we're going to have a peace treaty for a period, as it says, of 1/7. It's right in the book of Daniel as well. That means that treaty is going to start, in a sense, no matter when it's signed, it physically is not going to be put in place until the first day after Sukkot. In other words, Sukkot is the marker, because that's when the Jews started blood sacrifice on the Temple Mount. And if you go exactly 7 Hebrew years, which is 360 days per year, it brings you 2,520 days to Yom Teruah, or the Feast of the Long Blowing, or the Feast of Trumpets. Exactly 1,260 days after that, you have the Pesach, or Passover, which is coming up this weekend. And Passover basically is when the death angel passes over. And of course, it was a plague sent on Egypt. It's not just Egypt, it's the whole world now. We're literally seeing an archetype of the second, if you want to call it, unveiling of the prophetic things that happened at the ancient times when God took the Israelites out of Egypt. And it says also in the book of Jeremiah and elsewhere that the first Aliyah, which is the Aliyah to go out of Egypt to the Promised Land, there'll be a great Aliyah from all the lands of earth. And it's not just going to be Jews or ancient Hebrews, it'll be Christians returning to the land of Israel. And the Abrahamic territory was given us all the way from the Nile River to the Euphrates River and all the way down to the Sinai. That land has been given by God, who owns the title on all the land. And when that great Aliyah happens, that's when Messiah returns. It is going to require a people who take control back of the earth, who are the bride of Christ and have the scepter of the Most High God, and actually are hearing and doing God's will, that are going to say, we're not going to tolerate taking away our sovereignty as citizens in America, or destroying the rights of women in other countries by accepting Islam, or supporting ISIS, or not fighting against, for example, Russia, who's turning back into a Christian nation. We should be making alliances with Russia to get rid of the drug trade in Afghanistan and get rid of radical Islam, which, by the way, Bashar al-Assad says the same thing.
The NATO armies have enabled it.
Exactly. The reason why they enable it, by the way, comes...
The Muslim extremists did in Afghanistan is they put a stop to it. We came back in and we said, start planting them again.
Tim, the reason why they did it is to get billions and trillions of dollars so they could build more underground cities, more off-world space platforms, more horrifying weapons of mass destruction. It's demonic. And people don't see that, it'd be like a bug hitting the glass. If you don't see the spiritual side to the evil that's going on, and you only see the geopolitical and the very surface level or the dialectic one side of it, you'll never understand what's really happening to your world. It is evil.
Wow.
Evil.
Right.
And unless the Most High God and His people, which are called by His name, rule the earth as a proxy, as the bride of the Most High God, as the New Jerusalem on this planet, there will never be peace or survivable human population in a civilization on earth. Never.
That's right.
And there's no alternative. There's no other, quote, religion or real lives going on. There's personal relationship and a group relationship with the Most High as the bride with authority and a scepter.
You're right with God, folks. God bless.
Genesis is defined as an origin, creation, or the beginning.